I, Cleone Stapleton Simmonds, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God. Indeed, to give my response to the resolution just debated by the Honorable Premier. But before doing so, Mr. President, and I am very mindful of the time, I do crave your indulgence to permit me to just say a few brief words to express my profound gratitude to persons who have been instrumental or who were instrumental in ensuring my safe journey to stand in this honorable house today. Mr. President, it is indeed an honor for me to stand before you today and to set my footing in this honorable house. As a child, Mr. President, this was perhaps a dream of mine that I perhaps did not foresee in this near future. I didn't anticipate, Mr. President, that perhaps this dream might have come true at some point when I was perhaps in my mid-40s. But it is indeed a pleasure for me to stand here, just being the mere age of 37, and perhaps being the youngest member of this honorable parliament. And also, Mr. President, it is also indeed an honor for me to stand here, also being a female, and I am very pleased to join with the member, the nominated member, Honorable Hazel Brandy Williams. I wish to take this opportunity to thank God Almighty for giving me the guidance, the strength, and the wisdom to be able to successfully embark on this journey. I also wish to thank my predecessor, the Honorable Joseph Parry, for laying the footpath for me to be able to follow into his footsteps. I thank my family, my immediate family, my husband and my son, who are present here today, as well as my father and my two siblings, who were able to grace us with their presence this morning. Mr. President, albeit that the notice for this morning's sitting was very short indeed, I do wish to state for the record, Mr. President, that I do hope that this is a one-off instance, and taking into consideration the state of emergency, I do concur that the urgency was perhaps somewhat justifiable. However, I do wish to say, Mr. President, that I hope, this being my first time, that this is not a continuation, a practice, or a habit of any such nature, and that in future adequate notice of at least 24 hours or 48 hours would be given. I'm not sure of the exact notice period, but I do sincerely hope that we would adhere to the notice period, Mr. President. Now, As I move to give my response to the resolution, I too myself, as indicated by the Honorable Premier, was at a loss as to why we had to come to the House today to really debate or pass this resolution, as I am very mindful, Mr. President, that a similar resolution was passed in the National Assembly yesterday. Now, having taken into consideration the justifications for the resolution, I perhaps sincerely understand why the resolution had to be passed. However, Mr. President, I do believe and sincerely believe that this resolution does not necessarily warrant us to be here today during a 24-hour curfew, and perhaps same could have been debated sometime next week. That is just my respectful view on the whole issue, Mr. President. In relation to the COVID-19 pandemic, it is quite unfortunate that St. Kitts and Nevis we now find ourselves in this position, simply because, Mr. President, we would have had the benefit of foresight. The COVID-19 pandemic, really, we were able, along with the rest of the world, to really see its catastrophic effects, having been introduced in Wuhan, China, sometime back in December 2019, and looking at its effects there through January 2019. Mr. President, it is my respectful contention that perhaps greater initiative could have been taken and greater measures could have been taken by us here in St. Kitts and Nevis in order to somewhat alleviate or reduce the impact, the present impact that we are now facing of COVID-19, because we had the benefit of foresight. We were able to look and to see the impact of COVID-19 on other countries. It is my respectful submission, Mr. President, that we perhaps reacted a little bit too slow in terms of not properly closing our borders on time, and so therefore it is almost as if the government sat back and waited until we had confirmed cases in order to react. And so therefore the measures of the government were somewhat reactionary rather than being precautionary or proactive. Mr. President, in light of that, I do sincerely understand the need and the measures taken by the government to ensure that we are able to reduce to some extent the impact of this COVID-19 pandemic on our shores, particularly us here in Nevis. And so therefore, I am indeed very grateful that the government has taken some initiative, although I do believe that they can do more, some initiative to ensure that we take protective measures to safeguard against the impact. However, Mr. President, it is my respectful view that the state of emergency, or the extension of the state of emergency for some 6-month period, is somewhat a very drastic measure at this time, considering the fact that we have 14 cases at hand, 4 cases in Nevis, and so perhaps it would have been more beneficial to us here in Nevis to somewhat give a shorter period of about 48 days to see the impact and for us to make a determination as to whether we are able to flatten the curve. Without that evidence before us, Mr. Speaker, I sincerely hope that we are not perhaps overreacting to the impact of this COVID-19 pandemic on our shores. And I say that with caution, Mr. President. I am not making any justification or advocating that we sit back idly and wait until something happens and then react. I am simply saying that perhaps 6 months is a very long time in order for us to be under a state of emergency, and it does not necessarily afford us the opportunity to really monitor the situation at hand. Now, Mr. President, I am also very mindful of not just the health impact of COVID-19, the social impact, but more so the economic impact of COVID-19 on the Nigerian society. It has not been easy, Mr. President. When we look at our own unique situation here in Nevis, I think the first state of emergency was perhaps issued around the last week in March, somewhere around the 28th of March. And so, today's date being the 18th of April 2020, we can say that the country has been under a state of emergency for almost a month. 21 days, yes, correct, almost a month. Now, Mr. Speaker, during that period, it has been a very challenged 21 days for some, if not most Nigerians. And so, I ask the government to take into consideration the economic impact of COVID-19 on most Nigerian households. For example, Mr. President, to date, we have heard from since the end of March that there have been a relief package by Social Security to give some sort of alleviation or relief to persons who have been laid off as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. President, some 21 days later, and not even one check have been issued by Social Security to sort of ease the burden or the financial pressure or the financial hardship of many individuals. Every time there is a lockdown, 24-hour lockdown, and after the release of same, we notice that the supermarkets are filled. We can see a number of Nigerians lining up, extensive long lines of persons trying to get supplies within the supermarkets. Mr. President, we see continuous spending. People are spending, they need food, and therefore they're going to the supermarkets to buy food. But one has to wonder, Mr. President, as to without having the ability to earn an income or without any earnings coming in, how are those persons really able to be in the supermarkets every day to buy food in order to feed their children? Mr. President, that cannot be easy. It cannot be easy for persons. And so, perhaps, had we had the benefit of methodological planning without so much bureaucracy in terms of having to fill out the necessary forms, the necessary going through the Labor Department in order to get Social Security aid, had the relief been more accessible, Mr. President, I do believe that persons within the Nigerian society would have feel the ease of the burden, the ease of the hardship in terms of being able to provide for their families. And so I ask the honorable members of this parliament that whilst it is well and good to come into this house and to say that we have been doing so and we have implemented XYZ measure, I am simply asking the honorable members of this house, Mr. President, to when they come to Parliament, to come with a finite plan with tables, table lines, timelines, with specific instructions to give guidance to the people of Nevis. All we have been hearing for the past couple of weeks is that you're going to get relief from Social Security. I do note the Honorable Premier's submission that he indicated that the relief checks would be presented to persons on Monday. I do hope that we are able to stick to that timetable. But, Mr. President, what concerns me really is what is the stimulus or the relief package for those persons who we know would not necessarily qualify for a Social Security benefit? For example, those self-employed persons such as bus drivers, fishermen, or persons just in line who have not been making their Social Security contributions. What measure, what package is in place, what relief package or initiative is in place to ensure that the hardship, the financial hardship, is somewhat eased for them? I have not heard that demonstrated, debated here today, Mr. President. What I have heard is that there are a number of initiatives, a number of incentives, but what specifically are they? People in this situation of panic, in this time of hardship, people simply want to know where can we go to get the relief, how soon can we expect the relief, and further, how long are we going to be in this state of economic hardship? Mr. President, I take the opportunity to remind you and also the members of the House that for some time now, some years now, Nevis has been suffering from an economic plight. The economic activity in Nevis really has been on a downward spiral for some time. And so therefore, Mr. President, I do sincerely ask this, that the COVID-19 pandemic has somewhat worsened the impact of the economy, simply because a number of business places had to close down. We know the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the tourism sector. It is totally non-existent. And so therefore, Mr. President, I do ask the government, I was really of the respectful view that we were coming to the House today to really discuss a fine-tuned bill that would outline some sort of relief for the economic hardship that members of the Nevian society has been facing. Yes, Mr. President, I am mindful of the time, but I do ask you to please permit me to make my presentation, because I am speaking not only for myself, not only for my party, but for the mass majority of the Nevian public. People really need to know they are feeling the economic hardship. As it relates to long-term planning,
the matter at hand actually is the resolution. Okay, I noticed that you have been trending on outside. I allow you to go through because it's your first, but if you were to, I would advise you to stick to the resolution at hand, because you're talking about the incentives that people ought to get and so on. That is a different matter for a different day. But today is the resolution that we are dealing with, and I would want you to stick to the resolution.
Mr. President, very grateful for your guidance, but indeed, if I may respectfully say, Mr. President, that the impact of COVID-19 also plays a significant role to the resolution before me. How can we in the House debate a resolution to extend the state of emergency, which is what the resolution basically is about, without debating the impact of that state of emergency? And Mr. President, I am simply saying that in taking all of the submissions into consideration, we do have to look at the impact, the economic impact, or the adverse effects of COVID-19 on the Nivijan society, not just from a health perspective, not just in terms of safeguarding and protecting Nivijans, but also looking at the adverse effects that COVID-19 is having on the economy. When we have a state of emergency and a lockdown, Mr. President, if I may dare say, and I do hope that the members of this House, perhaps it is not affecting them economically as much as, those Nivijan of lower income or those persons who have lost their income. But nevertheless, Mr. President, it is indeed pertinent to this resolution because if we are coming here to ask for an extension for 6 months, we surely have to look at whether that is in the best interest of all stakeholders, not just the members of this Honorable House, but also the Nivijan society. And so I do have to advocate for them because these, Mr. President, are the challenges that we face. These are the phone calls, the questions that I get daily. And so I have to advocate based on the people, the common people, the people who feels it. It says, Mr. President, who feels it knows it. And so whilst all of the members here, not including myself, can definitely guarantee once they leave here today, they are sure of a salary, a substantial salary, not many Nivijans are in the same position. And so we do have a sense of hysteria, anxiety. People are wondering, how are we able to cope? How are we going to cope? What will happen after 6 months? How long are we going to stay in this economic plight for? And so these are things that the resolution, even though not written here on paper, these are the things that are between the lines that must be debated in this Honorable House. And so I do say, Mr. President, that whilst I must say I take the government initiative, I am simply asking them to take into consideration that in order to alleviate the anxiety, the hardship, that when we come to present resolutions in Parliament, we have to look at the overall impact and we have to be in a position to give people specific and clear goals and objectives. And so, Mr. President, I did indicate that I would not keep you. I will not keep the House any further, but I must say that the measures put forward by the government, that they need to be fine-tuned. They need to be fine-tuned, and I ask them to please take that into consideration. They need to be fine-tuned so that they could give people some sort of clear relief. People have many questions as to when school is going to open. Persons like me who own a small business, I have inherent fear of hardship as to whether I would be able to continue to have the doors of my law firm open so that I could continue to provide employment for my staff. These are the realities that people are facing, Mr. President. So I dare say, in response to the resolution before me, I note that the honorable member is seeking, in line with the resolution passed yesterday in the National House of Assembly, for a 6 months extension of the state of emergency. But I am simply asking on what basis. And whilst we are doing so in one spectrum, on the other spectrum, the government has not brought anything to the table to tell the people, the good people of Nevis, how they intend to alleviate the hardships. And so we have heard that there will be an issuance of the Social Security checks on Monday, but what happened thereafter? What should people look to next month? When will be the issuance of the next Social Security check? What are the initiatives for those people who do not qualify for Social Security? Where do they find their outlet? Mr. President, I am sure that all of us here in this Honorable House, we have looked at the initiative brought on by the Nevis Reformation Party to assist persons in filling out the Social Security Relief Form. And, Mr. President, when I look at the number of persons who partake in that initiative, it is genuinely telling me that people are literally suffering in this country. And we cannot overlook that. The members of this Honorable House are to take this into consideration and take a more practical and sensitive approach to this COVID-19 pandemic. It is not okay for us to say that we are going to extend the state of emergency. Whilst that is a good initiative, and do not get me wrong, whilst that is a good initiative, my argument, my respectful submission is whether or not it warrants such a lengthy extension. Wouldn't it have been better for us to give a shorter extension to monitor the situation on hand, to look at the number of cases coming before us, to see whether we have reached the point where we are able to flatten the curve, and then, Mr. President, we can make the necessary case for an extension of the state of emergency. I am simply saying, Mr. President, it is my respectful submission that the 6 months period, whether it was passed in the National Assembly or not, it is just my respectful submission that it is perhaps too long in this case. Mr. President, if you may permit me an additional 2 minutes just to wrap up, I must say that I take this opportunity to employ and to encourage the members of this Honorable House to take this period of COVID-19 with some sort of sensitivity. COVID-19, the virus, coronavirus, it has no blinders, Mr. President. It can affect any one of us. It does not single out, it does not discriminate. We have looked at the international news. We know what the persons in the UK are experiencing, the persons in New York, even those in China, France, Italy. We see the impact. People are dying. That is the reality. But also, we have to look at the second side of the coin. We are looking at one side, but we also have to look at the economic impact of COVID-19, because the reality is COVID-19 is an immune virus. It attacks the immune system. So it is more likely to impact persons with weaker immune system. And, Mr. President, if it is that our people are unable to feed themselves, to feed their children, if they are unable to buy the necessary foods, which we know are very expensive, in order to boost their immune system, what would happen is that COVID-19 would have a greater impact on our people. And so therefore we have to put the necessary measures in place. We have to look at this from a more constructive and a more concrete perspective. Mr. President, the truth is, many of us here in Nevis, and more so Nevis, I find that the government has really been lax in terms of its initiative of dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. There are more that we can do, but as a people we need to unite. There has been no or little involvement of the opposition side. This is the time, and I really employ to the honorable members of this House that we all have to collectively put politics aside now, and we have to work together to see how best we can get our little Nevis, only 36 square miles, through this pandemic. we have to work together. We have to come up with ideas. And so I do employ, I do encourage, I ask the members of this honorable house to let us take this initiative with a more human and dignified approach so that we can ensure that we are able to work together to alleviate the hardships for our Nivision people. Mr. President, that is the extent of my respectful submission. I do take this opportunity to wish yourself and the other honorable members of this House a very safe journey. I employ to them, as well as the Nivision public, to ensure that they take heed or adhere to the precautionary measures issued by the healthcare professionals. I ask them to continue to practice social distancing, and I do ask them at this very time to please ensure that they be their brother's keeper. If it is that you can offer assistance to anybody within your community, whether they are your supporters or not, I ask them to take the initiative, because this COVID-19 pandemic is going to change the way we do things, or has been changing the way we do things here in St. Kitts and Nevis. And very soon, we are going to see a state of new normal. I thank you, Mr. President.